2:30. This is your Section 8 podcast, and I'm going to jump right into the case I asked you to read, Riley versus California. In Riley versus California, the Supreme Court held unanimously that generally police must first obtain a warrant before searching an arrested person's cell phone. Now, you can read into this cell phone, any other kind of electronic mediums somebody has on the person. I have a watch that has its own phone number, and I can be on a hike somewhere and make phone calls and listen to music and do all the stuff. Text even. Look at my emails. Not very well for my old eyes, but I can. So just know that. Also, I use the word generally. Remember, as we wrap up this course, something that we've talked about multiple times, there are always exceptions. If you remember back to midway through the course when we were looking at hearsay. Hearsay is a rule, but it had a gazillion exceptions for getting something into evidence that would otherwise be, by the rule, hearsay. So that's why a lot of times in the law we say generally. I like to think of the law as providing guardrails, lane lines, if you will. Something for us to aspire to stay within. But there are times when the condition of the roadway or the circumstances of the roadway, the conditions, or generally traffic patterns that whoever set up the lane lines want to divert us through, we move those lines temporarily because of circumstances, permanently under certain conditions. And you can think of, in those terms, as an analogy, all sorts of rules of the road and then all sorts of exceptions to those rules. For instance, I live near an intersection that kind of drives me nuts because on one hand there's a sign that says no right turn on red. Now, in some states that's not allowed at all, and in Illinois we allow a right turn on red in many circumstances, but it says no right turn on red. But then across the road it says right turn on red from right lane only, because there's two turn lanes. It's confusing. And you'll find, and you have found, I'm sure, that the law is confusing in these exceptions of these things that move out of our generally held principles. But in this instance, the Supreme Court ruled that the law of the land is that police must first obtain a warrant before searching a person's cell phone. And again, there's exceptions. In that case, the police searched David Riley's cell phone after he was arrested on gun charges and found evidence of gang activity. In a second case, police arrested Brima Wuri for selling drugs and used his cell phone to figure out where he lived, where they found more drugs and guns. The Fourth Amendment requires police to obtain a warrant before they conduct a search, unless an exception applies. The exception at issue in this case was a search incident to a lawful arrest. Now, the court refers back to the 1969 case of Schimmel versus California, and in that case, the court identified two factors that justify an officer searching an arrested person: officer safety and preventing the destruction of evidence. 4 years later, in United States versus Robinson, the court held that police could search a cigarette pack found on Robinson's person despite the absence of those two factors. In that case, the court noted, having in the course of a lawful search come upon the crumpled package of cigarettes, the officer was entitled to inspect it. The Riley court declined to extend Robinson to searches of data on cell phones. Applying first the Schimmel factor, the court observed that digital data stored on a cell phone cannot itself be used as a weapon to harm an arresting officer or to effectuate an arrestee's escape. The court wasn't convinced that destruction of data through remote wiping, third-party deletion of all data, or data encryption, an unbreakable password, were prevalent problems. Now we know that might be the case today. And as with anything, the law is quickly evolving in all ways, on all things, but especially with technology and the lightning speed that it comes to us. But on those two issues, the court found that even if there were concerns, law enforcement could address both of them later. And we, in fact, do address those things. And I'll use this time to make a little commercial. There may be some of you who are very tech savvy. I occasionally have a sort of what I call a come to Jesus moment with a student who has good ability to do all the things expected in a class, but for whatever reason isn't. And multiple times I've had a student tell me when I've questioned whether or not they've been struggling with the online course management system or with something on technology, they'll volunteer that they've built their own gaming computer and they got this wonderful gaming computer. And then I start asking them questions to determine that they're just sitting around with this incredible computer playing games. If you're one of those people, and here's the commercial, there's lots of opportunities for somebody with tech savvy skills. And not all of us are equipped with those things, nor do we have the interest. But if you have that interest, if that's something you enjoy as much as you found that you enjoy the law and the potential of a law and justice career, use it. Use it. It's like the person who also is really into accounting or financial data. There's room in law enforcement for you. If you're into science, there's all sorts of room in law enforcement for you. Any of your passions you can find, but in that area, and specifically related to the first topic for this section, that's something that works for you. So think about that. Now, to the argument that cell phones are materially indistinguishable from other items on an arrestee's person, that the lower courts have allowed police to search without warrants like wallets and purses, the Supreme Court said that is like saying a ride on a horseback materially is indistinguishable from a flight to the moon. Both are ways to getting from point A to point B, but little else justifies lumping them together. And the court noted cell phones are mini computers. And think about when this case came out. Cell phones are way advanced from the computers that we had 15 years ago, let alone when this case came out or 15 years before that. At that time, the court was inclined to look at the storage capacity of the actual device, but now we know the cloud presents a whole other issue. And the Riley court readily admitted that its decision will impact law enforcement, and it did, in its ability to combat crime. But The court noted that expectations for privacy come at a cost, and warrants are faster and easier to obtain now than ever before. And that's something I've been telling you, right? It's easy to go get a warrant if you have the facts behind it. And it protects you, it covers your butt. It allows you to go get evidence with little issue anticipated on what you acquire and what it's able to be used for. The court also stated that exigent circumstances may justify a warrantless search, for example, to prevent the imminent destruction of evidence in individual cases, to pursue the fleeing suspect, and to assist persons who are seriously injured or are threatened with imminent injury. Now, some of you appear at a crime scene first to preserve the evidence as the law enforcement officer who is sent to the scene. Some others of you may find yourselves arriving to gather and process evidence, maybe the crime scene officer. And then others of you may end up later receiving and analyzing that evidence. Maybe you become that tech cop. Wherever you fall in the process, securing, gathering, processing, or presenting evidence, if you're working as a legal assistant for the lawyer prosecuting the case or as the prosecutor, the lawyer, wherever you fall in the process, you should keep in mind your role and the law related to your assigned task. And you hear me say that often, but I want you to really take that home. That's what we do. I've enjoyed being able to fill some of the different roles that I'm talking to you about. And you may also, especially find yourself as I did, if you go into a particular field, moving to something different or having opportunities to advance your skills into something different. What you do and how you approach your job could very well help or hinder the investigation and subsequent arrest or attempt at conviction. And that's going to be noted in cases this week, or this section, I'm sorry. When it comes to the continuing evolution of electronic evidence, the general principles of evidence have not changed. They don't change regardless of the technology, the processes, the methods for obtaining, securing, and keeping the evidence in custody and intact. While these things may on their face appear or change rapidly, in the end, it's about documenting and having someone competent to testify about each stage of the discovery, collection, and preservation of evidence, electronic evidence included, right up to the date the evidence is offered to prove or refute the charges in court. And as noted in various cases that you will find and present, just like all the cases that we've seen before, this is true in every adjudication, hearing, or trial, civil or criminal. For the paralegal, the legal assistant, the lawyer, it's imperative that you're sure that the chain of custody exists and you line up the testimony necessary to allow evidence within that chain to be authenticated, to be presented at trial or hearing. For law enforcement, crime scene personnel, it's imperative that you keep a consistent process for collection, to storage, to trial, being prepared to authenticate that chain of evidence as required through your reports, through documents, through testimony. In criminal cases, this is the most frequent and important issue regarding evidence you're going to encounter every day. So know the law, carry out your respective duties accordingly. So let's switch directions a little bit. Second part of our final assignment in this course is to consider the topic of preparing to testify. And I urge you to keep and use the document I shared on testifying. It's a valid guide to preparing to testify. Keep and use this document as you prepare to testify or prepare others to testify in a criminal case. Police officers, you need to write good reports and then read those reports before you come to testify. If you wrote a good report and you read the report before you come to testify, you're going to testify better. Be familiar with the case or facts that you're testifying about. And otherwise, just be prepared to testify. Know your report. If you wrote a good report, go back and review that report. In all likelihood, you're going to be called to testify months, maybe years after you've actually been part of that case. And remember, you get to have your report available. If you don't recall something, don't guess. You get to have your recollection refreshed as a exception to the hearsay rule. You get to look at your report on the witness stand. Most witnesses don't have that ability. So make and take the time to prepare to testify each and every time, each and every case. It's more than your reputation, it's the integrity of the case and the system that you took an oath to serve. But make no mistake, it's a bit more basic than that, because there's nothing more embarrassing for you as when you face a tough cross-examination from a defense lawyer, and especially if you're exposed as being unprepared. You want to be professional, do your best, and prepare from the smallest case to the largest case. From the low dollar retail theft to the homicide. Every single day, every single time. And if you're the legal assistant or lawyer, you should make it a personal mission to see that your witnesses are prepared to testify. If you're talking about police officers, they have access to their reports. Did they review those reports? They review prior statements or evidence that they'll be called to testify about? If possible, and I would suggest that it's always possible if you do your due diligence in trying to make it happen, schedule time to review potential testimony and the case with your witnesses, especially police officers if you're working for the prosecution. Now, the police officers aren't going to meet with the defense attorney, but they're going to meet with the prosecution. And when you go to that meeting with, as the police officer, be prepared. And when you're lining things up as a prosecutor, be prepared. You're going to have a better presentation of your case. Bottom line, hopefully, great work was done to work the case up so you don't mess it up or do less than your absolute best when it comes to presenting the evidence and testimony at trial. Now, I've had occasion in my life to call the balls and strikes. I just ran into a friend and mentor who taught for us for a long time, a judge who used to teach actually this course, CRJ 230. I would teach the day section, he would teach the night section. For over 20 years in Peoria, Pekin, East Peoria, Creve Coeur, Marquette Heights, occasionally other places if they called, I heard municipal cases, sometimes involving crimes, sometimes involving property disputes and all sorts of municipal issues. I called the balls and strikes. I was the hearing officer, was my title, but essentially the municipal judge. A judge's duty is to call the balls and strikes. A judge's duty is to decide issues. And over the course of that time, I had many of my former students. Initially, when I first started doing it, I have some of the people that I went to school with and knew professionally. But over a lot of those years, I had former students come in. And it was always frustrating sitting there as the umpire, as the judge, to have a police officer come in unprepared. Worse, when they wrote a crappy report. I will say that that only happened a handful of times, and I'm very proud of that for our programs and the things we've tried to do in this program for, you know, a long, long time. Um, but it happens, and I felt embarrassed for them. And usually I would take the people aside after I asked them to come back when the hearings were over, and then I'd, you know, in a very mentor-like fashion, suggest that they get their stuff together because they embarrass themselves. And sometimes, occasionally, they lost the case for, and it's probably a case that shouldn't have been lost for the city that they work for. You don't want to be there, so do your best, always. Finally, the last time I'm going to talk to you in this class, I thank you for your attention to this final assignment as well as throughout the semester. If you have a chance to take my other courses, especially Administration of Justice, which covers stop, frisk, search, arrest, the most important things that we think of in law enforcement, including use of force and use of deadly force, please do so. It may only be offered in the summer. If it's offered other times, take it other times, but it's not required for criminal justice students. It's not required for legal studies students. It is required for law enforcement students. And I'll tell you right now, it should be required for everyone because it's the course that keeps you from ending up in the news for doing something stupid, for ending somebody's life or harming somebody or just doing something contrary to your duties in the law, doing something dumb. And sometimes, as we know from Laquan McDonald, from George Floyd, from Eric Garner, from Breonna Taylor, all the dumb, senseless freaking deaths that were caused by people not knowing the things you'll learn in this class and not following procedure. Sometimes police officers ended up with criminal sentences and at a minimum sued civilly with careers over, as well it should have been. So really consider that course. Talk to your advisor if you're not signed up for it. Finally, criminal justice students and law enforcement students, keep in contact about jobs. Always go to the ICC law site to look for what's posted there. Same for legal studies students. But I wanted to throw in a commercial for the physical aspects of the job for those folks. You can always contact me for tips on interviewing, hiring, including the physical aspects, the power test, physical agility test required to be passed as part of the hiring process. You know, I served as the one of the fire and police commissioners for the city of Peoria for a long time. My only real hobby in life outside law and justice was coaching basketball. I did that at ICC in high school, some grade school. While coaching at the college, I became certified to teach group exercise in college, physical conditioning and weight training courses, and other physical ed courses. And during that time, I developed plans for students to pass the various physical agility tests required for public service, including the power test for people who want to become police officers in Illinois. When I had the intern class I made that a part of the class. And I'm always willing to give you some tips if you're struggling with that test or you're struggling with the hiring process. And yes, many departments require, and they should, that you demonstrate you're staying in decent shape throughout your career. But for the legal studies students, getting regular exercise is as good for your mind as it will be your body. And sometimes those law jobs are some of the most stressful and sedentary, so you need it. And I'll help you with some advice there too, as well, if you want it. The time to start developing those habits is now, and you won't regret it later. I've been a part of the Peoria County Bar Association's Wellness Committee since its inception, and we decided that we needed to do that because it's the truth. Otherwise, I thank you for your efforts in the class. I hope you got something from mine. And as always, if you need me, you know where to find me.